After some delay and reddening of her cheeks, Deirdre replied, "Bullshit." "Then why did you come to my volleyball matches?" He grinned. "Because you came to my performances," she chuckled in response. Brett tried to kiss her goodbye, but she pushed him away. "I can't kiss you again," she muttered. "It's too dangerous." Brett squeezed her shoulder, smiled, and left the room. Deirdre had to take a nap before heading to the Pasadena Playhouse for the next evening's performance, the last of the short performances, and she was trying her best to put Brett out of her mind. As she and Kent tried to have another child, Deirdre was thrilled when she found out she was pregnant 4 weeks later. Again, she had slight concerns because Brett and she had sex without a condom, but 2 weeks before she had sex with Kent several times when she was in her fertile period. And that night with Brett, she was not in her fertile period. Once again, her OB/GYN assured her, based on all normal signs, that she was pregnant prior to the night of debauchery with Brett, although apparently she did not tell the doctor about the encounter. Although it was a big relief for Deirdre, she was still worried until big boy Blake was born. Deirdre was relieved when Blake had blue eyes like Kent and Deirdre, rather than brown eyes like Brett and his parents. Her OB/GYN also told Deirdre that Blake was apparently born full-term and had developed all the hallmarks of a full-term baby, making it nearly impossible for Deirdre to believe that she wasn't already pregnant when she had sex with Brett. Deirdre and Brett's lives continued without further contact for almost 2 years before 2 life-changing events occurred, one affecting each of them. Brett was very concerned that Cheryl couldn't get pregnant even though they had been trying for years. Having children was one of Brett's main goals in life, and not having them made him feel like a failure despite his success in business. She and Cheryl were tested and were quite capable of conceiving a child, but for some reason it never happened. Cheryl was on a business trip when Brett needed to track down some charges on a business credit card he and Cheryl had. He knew she kept notes in a drawer in her office, but he didn't know which one. There was nothing of interest in the unlocked drawers, but after he found the key to the locked drawer and opened it, he found several folders related to credit cards. After finding out the information he needed, he put the business credit card folder back and saw a folder for a card he didn't recognize. He took it, opened it, and his life changed. It was a folder for a card in Cheryl's name, a card he knew nothing about. The very first document in the folder was a receipt from the doctor's office, dated just 4 days earlier, for a Depo-Provera shot. He didn't know what it was, so he took out his phone and looked for it. To his shock, he discovered that it was a well-known trade name for medroxyprogesterone acetate, a contraceptive injection containing the hormone progestin, and that Depo-Provera was given as an injection every 3 months to prevent pregnancy. Panicking, Brett dug into his credit card bills for the receipt and discovered a bill from the same doctor for the same amount as the first receipt, approximately every 3 months for the past 2+ years. "This bitch lied to me that she wanted children while still taking birth control," he screamed out loud. Brett didn't know what angered him more, the lies or the wasted time trying to conceive. Brett is a responsible guy. He immediately called Cheryl on her cell phone, told her as calmly as possible what he had discovered, and then said, "Get a lawyer, bitch. The divorce papers will be filed before you get home." Cheryl, desperate, returned on the first plane, but it was too late. The locks and codes on the house and garage had been changed, and even though it had only been 16 hours since Brett's call, his lawyer had acted quickly, and the divorce papers had already been filed. When Cheryl pounded on the door upon arrival, the documents had been filed and the marriage contract had been executed. The divorce papers also included a letter from Brett terminating her employment and a check for a year's severance pay, according to her employment contract. Despite Cheryl's attorney's efforts to obtain court-ordered counseling, Brett never spoke to her in person again. During the 6 months that the divorce case lasted, Brett negotiated with several other companies to buy his business and sold it for millions of dollars by the time the ink was dry on the divorce decree. About a month after Brett found the receipt for Cheryl's birth control shot, Deirdre suffered a devastating loss. Her husband, Kent, was going on a business trip to the same place where his parents were flying on vacation on his father's private jet. Deirdre begged Kent to take a commercial flight as she was less than thrilled with her father-in-law's flying abilities, and there was a chance of bad weather on the day they were due to fly. However, Kent brushed aside her concerns and flew with his parents. The tragedy that Deirdre tried to protect herself from happened. The plane crashed during a storm, killing Kent and both of his parents. Unfortunately, Kent did not have as much life insurance and savings as Deirdre thought, so her economic situation, although not bad, was not easy. She put more effort into pursuing her acting career, and luckily her parents lived nearby and were very helpful with the children. At 8:30 on a Wednesday morning, 6 months and 2 days after Kent's death, there was a knock on Deirdre's door. Precocious and recently turned 5, Carla, despite her mother's insistence that she never do so, opened the door to see a tall, blonde man standing there. After the initial shock of both the fact that a 5-year-old girl answered the door and her appearance, Brett found his voice and said, "Hello, young lady. Is your mother home?" "Who are you?" asked the little girl articulately. "I'm Carla, and I just turned 5 years old." "Well, 5-year-old Carla, please tell your mom that Brett Wilson has come and I'd like to talk to her." He smiled. At that moment, Brett heard a noise behind Carla and Deirdre's voice. "Carla, I asked you not to open the door." And the sound of footsteps. A few seconds later, Deirdre appeared in the open door in shorts and a t-shirt, no makeup, with disheveled hair, with 2-year-old Blake in her arms. Brett thought she looked amazing. "Brett?" a frightened Deirdre screamed, and then, stuttering, asked, "What, are you doing what here?" Which Brett interpreted as, "Why are you here?" A little taken aback by Blake's appearance, Brett calmly answered with a smile, "I hope you'll let me in so I can explain everything. I'm just I need to get ready for an audition, and I can't find a babysitter," she stuttered. "Maybe I can help." He smiled, and then carefully walked past her and the children into the house. Deirdre was clearly embarrassed by her disheveled appearance and agitated by the circumstances, but was eventually able to explain that her nanny had canceled the appointment last night. Her mother had agreed to come today, but had woken up sick and did not want to infect the children. "When do you need to either confirm an audition or cancel it?" Brett asked calmly. "By noon," she answered. "Then let's see if I can establish contact with your children by then, and if so, then I can watch them," he continued. Deirdre was stunned, but wasn't sure she wanted to turn it down as she really wanted the role she was auditioning for. He convinced her to at least think about it. As he continued, "In the meantime, I can help you prepare breakfast for them and tell them why I'm here." Okay, maybe," Deirdre replied. "I need to change my clothes first because I look..." But Brett interrupted her by saying, "Great, you look great." She blushed. Brett then sat down on a chair and showed some magic tricks to Carla and Blake, who clapped their hands happily. Then, after Deirdre showed him where the cereal and bowls were, despite his remark that she looked great, she went off to change into something presentable, do her hair, and put on some makeup, so excited that she didn't question why she was like that. Excited. While Brett sat and chatted with the children while they ate, Deirdre returned. She asked him in a whisper, "Why are you here?" Brett smiled and, between teasing and laughing with the children, said, "I was recently divorced, heard about your husband's untimely death, waited 6 months, which I considered a respectable amount of time, and then came to you to see if we could have a mutually beneficial long-term relationship. Are you trying to get into my panties again?" Deirdre asked, but not with anger or contempt. "Of course I do," Brett smiled. "But I want more. I want a loving, long-term relationship. I've denied that I'm attracted to you for too long, and I want to find out if my infatuation with you will last." Deirdre was confused, but at that moment, she had no intention of kicking him out. After all, he was the best sex she's ever had, and she hadn't had sex since 2 weeks before Kent died. So she changed the subject, and between talking to the kids, cleaning up after breakfast, and entertaining the kids at playtime, they talked about their lives since they last saw each other, including Brett's discovery about Cheryl and Deirdre's dissatisfaction with Kent's infrequent attention to the children and lack of support for her career. By midday, it was clear that the kids were already attached to Brett, so Deirdre got dressed for the audition. As she prepared to leave, she gave Brett her cell phone number, and he gave her the keys to his Corvette, while asking for the keys to her minivan with child seats in case he wanted to take the kids to the park or to lunch. Luckily, the Veda didn't have a stick shift, so after a brief briefing from Brett, she was off. Deirdre returned home around 4:30 and heard laughter coming from the living room. When she looked in, both children were sitting on Brett's back, riding him like a horse, squealing with delight. They paused the game to hug Mom and then went back to riding Brett until she changed into casual clothes and returned to the living room. The four then began to discuss what each had done that day. Little Blake was stuttering and talking so excitedly about going to lunch and going to the park that it was hard to understand him, and Carla was talking non-stop about the swing, reading books, and generally having a fun day. Deirdre quickly realized that Brett had given the children more high-quality attention in one day than Kent had in the last month of his life. When she managed to get a word in edgeways, Deirdre answered Brett's question about how the audition went. "Very good. I hope they call me back," she smiled. After the kids got cleaned up, Brett took them out to dinner, and when it was time for bed, both kids insisted that he read them 2 bedtime stories before they went to sleep, which he happily agreed to. When they were both put to bed, he and Deirdre chatted. "Thank you so much for today," she purred. "The kids obviously loved it, and you saved my life." Today during dinner, I got a text back, but unfortunately also another one from my mom saying she's still sick. So I was wondering, if I could, impose... Deirdre hesitated until Brett interrupted her. "I would be happy to see the children again tomorrow," he smiled. "Thank you. You're so kind," Deirdre stuttered, looking into Brett's eyes and feeling her arousal grow before Brett stood up and picked her up. "What time do you want to see me here tomorrow?" he asked. "Wouldn't 8 o'clock be too early?" she asked. "Then see you later." He smiled, quickly kissed her on the lips, and left. He wanted so badly to have her right then and there, but he was playing the long game. Well, at least the middle game, and decided it was best to hold his fire until the right moment. Brett arrived at Deirdre's house at 8 o'clock sharp, and the children greeted his arrival with shouts of joy. It was clear that Deirdre was making a special effort to look good for him, and he quickly kissed her on the cheek and whispered, "You look amazing," making her blush. While Deirdre took Brett's Corvette to the audition again, Brett took the kids to the zoo, lunch, a children's amusement park, and, although they were too young, a miniature golf course. When Deirdre returned home at 5 o'clock, excited to have been given the lead role in the play, the children were already asleep, passed out from a long, exciting day. Brett bought some groceries and prepared dinner for Deirdre, and a simpler dinner for Carla and Blake after they got up from their 2 hours of rest. After another story, when the children were already asleep, Deirdre thought that Brett might leave again. With the shyness of a little girl, without looking him in the eye, she said, "You know, you could stay the night if you want." This was music to Brett's ears, but he wanted to tease her, so he said, "Oh, I didn't know you had a 4th bedroom where I could spend the night." And again, without looking him in the eyes, Deirdre answered modestly, "Well, maybe you could sleep with me." Brett walked up to her, lifted her chin, kissed her passionately, and then replied, "You'll have to sleep a little, sexy." He picked her up and carried her into the master bedroom as Deirdre whispered in his ear, "Please be gentle. I haven't had sex since 2 weeks before Kent died." "I haven't had sex since I found out Cheryl was cheating on me," Brett replied, although technically that wasn't entirely true, since he was using 2 call girls, both of whom, coincidentally, looked a lot like Deirdre. Brett was gentle as they showered and he washed Deirdre. He was gentle when they made love for the first time. He was an animal after that, screwing Deirdre twice in the middle of the night. After they finally fell asleep, Deirdre and Brett were rudely awakened by Carla and Blake jumping on them the next morning. Thankfully, without removing the covers which would have exposed their naked bodies. The children were delighted to have Brett there, but were eventually persuaded to play a little on their own while the adults got up. After the children left, Deirdre came face to face with Brett. "I want to tell you something that might make you reconsider your long-term relationship with me, no matter how great the sex is. I had my tubes tied after Blake was born, so I can't have children with you." "You already have 2 from me," he chuckled. Deirdre moved away from him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm Carla and Blake's biological father, that's what." "Why do you think so?" asked the amazed Deirdre. "Because all paternal family members have distinctive earlobes. Look at mine and compare them with your children's," he laughed. Deirdre actually looked at them and touched them with her hands. "They are similar, but this is nonsense. My children have blue eyes, and you and both your parents, I met them, remember, have brown eyes, so biologically they cannot be yours." "My biological mother had blue eyes," Brett chuckled. "Although Katie is a great mother and the only one I knew, my biological mother died when I was 2 years old. Since she had blue eyes, I have the recessive blue gene, and there is a 50-50 chance that our children will have blue eyes. Therefore, with your permission, I would like to do a DNA test to confirm that I am the biological father." A chill ran down Deirdre's spine. Brett kissed her and said, "Think about it. Wouldn't it be great if I was their biological father in addition to the adopted one I intend to become? Because I won't let you leave me." With that, he stood up, took a quick shower, and then went to make the kids, with Carla's enthusiastic help, blueberry pancakes for breakfast. Deirdre came into the kitchen with a shocked look on her face, just as everyone was finishing breakfast, although Brett was still keeping the pan hot and had prepared a couple more pancakes for her. Before lunch, the whole family went on a tour, and then Brett insisted that they go into the laboratory. Deirdre agreed. When the children and Brett had their cheeks swabbed, Brett paid for expedited DNA testing and agreed that the results would be emailed and then read back to him and Deirdre. When they returned to Deirdre's house, much to Deirdre and the children's dismay, Brett said he needed to leave for a few days to complete the sale of his business and prepare the house for sale. "I'll sell it, even if you don't let me move in with you," he told Deirdre, "but it's certainly what I want. Once the DNA results come back, we can test each other for a few months. And if we're half as compatible outside of bed as we are in bed, I'll want a permanent relationship with you." A shocked Deirdre could only nod her head as he kissed her passionately, hugged and kissed each of the children, and then waved as he drove off in his Corvette. By the time the DNA test results came back a week later, Deirdre, despite her initial confusion, was hopeful that Brett was the children's biological father. Statement, with a probability of 99.9999%. At the top of both children's reports left no doubt that it was him. She immediately called Brett, who she had spoken to every day since he left. "You were right," she said simply. "I'll be at your place tomorrow, and get ready for some hot sex," was all Brett said before ending the conversation. The next morning, Brett was greeted by laughing children. Handing each a gift, he fervently kissed the smiling Deirdre. After another full family day, the kids were put to bed. Brett read them 2 more stories, and then sat Deirdre down at the kitchen table. "During my absence, I kept my lawyer busy," Brett chuckled. "Here is the first document that, with your permission, will legally change the children's birth certificates, indicating me as the father. The second is a prenuptial agreement. If, as I hope, our relationship progresses to marriage, it stipulates that if I cheat on you during the marriage, you will receive $2,000, and the rest of the property will be divided 50-50. Since I seduced you when we were both married to others, I want to reassure you, because I will never cheat on you." Deirdre looked through the documents and then turned to Brett. "The marriage contract is not mutual. It does not provide for punishment in case of my betrayal. It needs to be revised to say that if I cheat, you will receive $2,000 of your money separately from the common property before everything is split 50-50. Now take me to bed so we can finalize these transactions and start determining, is our relationship long-term? After 5 months of marriage, during which the children and Deirdre were the happiest they had ever been, she began to hint at receiving the jewels. Brett asked Deirdre's parents to babysit when he took Deirdre to Hawaii for a week, proposed at midnight while they lay naked on a blanket on a remote beach, and 2 weeks later, after buying a new, bigger house, they got married. Both grandparents were delighted with this situation. The two grandmothers had enjoyed each other's company since their parents' weekend at UCLA and had become good friends over the past 5 months, especially since Brett's parents had moved to the same city as Deirdre and her parents. Although they were initially shocked that Brett was the biological father, the grandparents were never interested in the details. They were simply happy to have grandchildren to spoil. 3 years later, the Brett Wilsons celebrated 6-year-old Blake's birthday, attended not only by a dozen of his friends, but also by Carla and her 2 best friends. As Brett and Deirdre's mothers watched the children play, how actively Brett and Deirdre participated in their play, and how lovingly they interacted, Deirdre's mother turned to Brett's mother and said, "It's a shame that Deirdre and Brett had to go through trial marriages before they got together. They have an exemplary family and are ideal spouses. If Brett had acted on his attraction to Deirdre in college instead of denying and ignoring it, they could have had 8 more happy years together," Brett's mom replied. "At least they're together now, and along with Carla and Blake, the 4 of them make up the happiest family I've ever seen, and that makes me very happy too," Deirdre's mom replied. Both she and Brett's mom tried to hide tears of happiness. The party was a fantastic success, and all the children left with bags of gifts and big smiles on their faces and heartfelt hugs from Brett, Deirdre, Carla, and Blake. That night after Blake's 6th birthday, when the children were long asleep, Brett and Deirdre lay naked in bed, nose to nose. My 19-year-old self would be appalled that I'm married to a short, flat-chested brunette who makes a living from emotions. What could I say to him to calm him down? Brett mused out loud with a mischievous grin. That she has sex like a bonobo, so that you can barely keep up with her. That's what you should tell your dim-witted 19-year-old jock, you half-wit. Now, take me and let me rock your world for the 10th time this week. Deirdre snapped with her own mischievous grin. He did. She is too. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one.